Okay, hello everybody. Thank you for joining this webinar on open science, open innovation, synergies, and conflicts. Quick thank you to the 370, I believe, 370 registrants. Many of you are coming actually from Canada, US, and Argentina, so thank you for getting up early. And your interests. Great. If we do a quick introduction to this webinar series, first of all, this is the first of potentially 3 webinars on the topic. As you can imagine, it's a rather large topic, and there's no way we can cover it in a single go. Before I introduce my partners in crime and the prestigious speakers, I just want to deal with the obvious problem in the webinar room, and that is our gender imbalance. I want you to know that that in no way reflects the lack of experts in the other gender. It simply reflects our lack of organization to run this on a last minute and to specifically target young researchers applying for grants in September. But give us a chance, and in the follow-up seminars, we will try and address that issue. I can guarantee you it's our priority. Around the webinar room, you have Marco Macias, who will be running the show from the background, and he is innovation consultant, entrepreneur, and scientist, and also very active with one of our sponsors, the Marie Curie Alumni Association. You also have the moderator, Gareth O'Neill, who is the ex-Eurodoc president, also a linguist and an early career researcher. And myself, I'm a grant support officer and open science enthusiast at the Danish Technical University. So for this kickoff session, we have invited Robert-Jan Smits and Javier de la Cueva, who will give us a little bit of a introduction to open science, open innovation, what is the background to the EC policy and where can we expect major opportunities and challenges. So without further ado, I want to give the floor to Robert-Jan Smits, if the technology will allow us. For those of you who do not know him, he's the ex-Director General of DG Research and Innovation at the European Commission, and one of the architects of the Horizon 2020 program and Plan S on open access to research publications. So, Robert-Jan, floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, and hello to everyone. I've been asked to set the scene a little bit for open science and open access publications, and open access data. And I would start with the following. Some 5 years ago, the European Commission launched a broad consultation amongst the science community, based on the following question. We have the impression that the way we are doing science, the way we're doing research is changing big time at the moment. And can you, as members of the scientific community, do you recognize that? Do you also think that the way we work, the way we do science, the way we do research is changing big time? We put out that question and we got an enormous amount of reactions, whereby indeed scientists from all kinds of disciplines were confirming that the way they were doing things in the field of research was changing big time. And then we asked them, what are the drivers of these changes? And they mentioned the following. They said, first of all, of course, the big data. The exponential increase on data is really a game changer. And SINTEF, that's the Scandinavian Research Organization, they mentioned that 90% of the data which have ever been generated were generated in the last 10 years. So it shows you that data is indeed a big game changer, a big driver for the change in which we do research. But there was also a second driver that the science community mentioned in this consultation for the change, and that was very much linked to, of course, the digital technologies and the digitization of research, which allows us to mine and to make sense of this tsunami of information, of data. Modern software, search engines, high performance computing, and of course the internet has opened up new worlds for scientists and allowed them to mine the data. But there was also a third reason which was mentioned why the way we are doing research and we are getting engaged in science is changing. And that was very much as driver the emergence of a global science community. According to the AAAS, there are currently around 5.5 million researchers and 500 million graduates. And there are at the moment over 200 million students worldwide in third level education. And that's a fourfold jump from 47 million in the 80s. The global student body is projected to reach 660 million by 2040. So that shows that the globalization and the growth of the global science community is also a big driver of the change in the way we do research. But then last but not least, the driver was mentioned, the growing demand from society, from politicians for accountability, for transparent science, and for open science. Increasingly, society and politicians expect return on investment. They expect bang on the buck. And this whole discussion, this consultation, led to the definition of an agenda for open science, the new ways of doing science in Europe. And this open science agenda has a number of components, of which the first one is very much related to open access. And I come back to that in a second. But there are, of course, also other components of this open science priority list, of this open science agenda. Research integrity is on there. There is increased global cooperation on there. There is, of course, skills on there. But I think for today's seminar, we very much focused on the open access. Open access, very clearly seen as a way to boost the effectiveness of scientific cooperation, to boost the spread of information in a much more rapid way. And at the European Commission level, it was clearly said that the European Commission, the European Union, want to lead by example in the field of open access. And there, of course, robust plans were developed in order to move open access forward. And a distinction was made between open access publications and open access to data. And of course, these are linked, these are intertwined because publications are always backed up by data. But it was, I think, also to allow the debate and the action plan to progress, to make this net distinction between open access scientific publications and open access to scientific data. Now, with regards to open access publications, we have been talking about this for the last 25 years. And if you look at the statistics, at the moment, only 15% of all scientific publications are freely available in open access. That means that 85% is still behind expensive paywalls for the happy few to have access to. And I mentioned notably the happy few because getting the subscriptions, paying for the subscriptions of the prestigious, so-called prestigious journals is of course an enormous burden for academic libraries, but you can imagine also for the lesser developed countries and for countries like in Africa who also are keen to build up a science base. So it was clearly felt that with regard to open access publications, things had to change, but also that the progress towards open access scientific publications was extremely slow. It had only grown by 10% over the last 10 years. And there was a plea made by the ministers of science of the European Union for a robust action plan to change the situation for once and for all. And this robust action plan was, as a matter of fact, presented a year and a half ago. It was Plan S, which was, as a matter of fact, a very straightforward plan, meaning that if in future a grant is given at European level under Horizon 2020 or the successor program Horizon Europe, or a grant is given in the UK by the Research Council, or in Norway, or in the Netherlands, or in France, or any other funding agency, that scientists who obtain the grant can only publish their findings, their articles, in high quality open access journals or on high quality open access platforms. In other words, no longer behind paywalls. And this Plan S, which has these key principles, has led to an enormous debate in Europe in which there was a mobilization of the science community in order to be involved in the debate, but also to see how Plan S could be taken forward. Plan S was immediately signed up to by 13 European funding agencies, and then a year ago in October, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation followed, and the Wellcome Trust. After that, China got on board, and earlier this year, even India signed up to Plan S, making it quite clear that these countries and the funding agencies of these countries are very much committed to open access to scientific publications, with the principle publicly funded know-how should be made available freely and rapidly and not be hidden behind expensive paywalls. Now, as we speak, Plan S is still being debated. There are still, as we speak, funding agencies signing up. The last one was the funding agency from Argentina. But we see also that in the United States, at the level of the universities, but also at the NIH, there's a growing interest, of course, for Plan S and for the whole open access movement. So with regards to open access scientific publications, I see that there have been enormous developments taking place, not only in Europe, but in the world, and that we see the alliance of countries or funding agencies keen to move towards open access very, very much being grown, this alliance, and being strengthened. There are, of course, smaller learned societies who run journals who are expressing concerns. And I'm very happy to see that in the context of Plan S, special attention will be paid to these smaller learned societies for their very specific journals. Learned societies who are keen to move to open access, but for them the transition and the revision cost may be quite high. I'm also quite keen to see that recently the coalition members of Plan S have decided to take a bit more time for implementing the provisions of Plan S by 1 year. So the target date is now 2021 instead of 2020. I think that's also a welcome development to give more members of the scientific community, more funding agencies to get ready for this big flip towards open access. So that's with regard to open access scientific publications. At the same time, the European Union, European Commission was quite keen also to move forward on the open access to data. And data which are arising from public grants for scientific research. And as a matter of fact, there the initiative of the European Science Cloud was launched. And let me be clear, the Science Cloud, European Science Cloud, is not about a physical place where data can be stored. It is about an ecosystem, a set of initiatives in order to move open access to scientific data forward. And it consists, first of all, of a major exercise to create data stewardship in the science community. To make it clear that looking after your data, taking care of the data, making the data available, interoperable, is not something of the IT specialist, but is a responsibility of the scientist when he or she is doing her work. And in order to promote that culture of data science, to promote the awareness of the importance of scientific data and also the need to look after that, training courses have been developed, but also quite cleverly, funding agencies have increasingly insisted on the preparation of data management plans, DMPs, meaning that if you are requiring or requesting a grant from the Dutch funding agency, from the Dutch Research Council, in your proposal, you have to include a data management plan in which you indicate how you're going to look after your data, where you're going to store them, where you're going to make them interoperable, etc., etc. So as part of the European Open Science Cloud initiative, a very important component is to create the culture of data stewardship in the science community to create data awareness, but also to get rid of this culture of what Pearl Dijkstra once called data hugging, where people say the data are mine, and we don't want to share it. However, we as scientists all want to have access to the data of our colleagues. But bringing our data to the table ourselves, there's often a lot of reluctance. So this culture of data hugging has to change. So the whole first pillar of the European Open Science Cloud initiative is very much related to awareness, data stewardship, training, and exchanging best practices. The second component of this European Open Science Cloud is very much related to the development of e-infrastructures. And these are support services where data can be stored, where it can be made interoperable. And you've seen that over the last years, notably from the EU budget for science, important e-infrastructures have been set up. Think of Elixir, which is run in Cambridge by EBI. Think of Claren and Daria. These are dedicated, CESTA, these are dedicated e-infrastructures. These are often composed of national nodes, which are federated normally by one headquarters in whatever country, whereby scientists are offered the possibility to store their data there, to make them interoperable, and to exchange the data. So the second pillar of the European Open Science Cloud is very, very much related to e-infrastructures, building e-infrastructures up, building safe havens where indeed scientists can store their data, curate the data, and make them interoperable. And that brings me to the third pillar of the European Open Science Cloud initiative, and that is very much related to the FAIR principles, making the data findable, accessible, interoperable, researchable. And that work is very much done in the context of the Global Data Alliance, which is a movement of scientists who gets together. And I've been to a couple of these meetings, the Research Data Alliance, the RDA, where discussions take place on how can we come to standards for data, how can we make data interoperable, how can we look after curation of data. And this is a movement which has been extremely impressive and has been growing. And also from the side of the European Commission, we have been actively involved in the RDA. So this is where the developments with regard to open access data, the European Open Access Science Cloud, are at the moment. The European Union is at the moment preparing its next funding program, which is called Horizon Europe. It is supposed to have a budget of 100 billion euro, so it will be again be the biggest program for science innovation in the world. And if you look at the provisions, the proposed provisions for this new program with regard to open access scientific publications, that will be all around the principles of Plan S. And with regard to open access data, this will be very, very much around data management plans, about FAIR principles, about respect for the FAIR principles. And it is, I think, only logical that through a multi-billion program like Horizon Europe, this insistence on open access, be it scientific publications, be it data, is indeed pushed forward, because we talk about an enormous amount of taxpayers' money which is invested. And this taxpayers' money has to be used in the most effective way. And that means that the data that are generated need to be made available in such a way that they can be used by peers, that it can be used by other scientists. Now, there's always been, with regard to open access data, a very important opt-out possibility under the European programs, meaning that those organizations or individual researchers who do not want to share their data, for whatever reason, can opt out. I think it's quite important to always, at least for the years to come, maintain such an opt-out provision, because notably for small companies, the data are of course the most essential assets they have, and making these data available can sometimes indeed lead to commercial disadvantaged situations. So this opt-out position is there and hopefully will be there in future, but surprisingly, this opt-out position is used less and less. So we see more and more willingness from scientists, but also from companies, even from big pharma companies, the willingness to share the data, to make the data available, to make them interoperable, and to store them in places where others can have access to. There, of course, the policy is very much a policy which the European Commission has followed for the last years. Openness where possible and closing things where necessary. That is, I think, the golden rule to move forward in the future. And this opt-out position, and I'm very much insisting on it, why I think it's important, we should not forget that in many of the projects at the EU level, but also global projects, consortia work together, which are composed of universities, public organizations, but also of companies. And not allowing companies to opt out would lead to, I think, much less cooperation in these consortia. At the same time, as I mentioned already, we see a cultural change also in the private sector. We see more and more even the pharma companies willing to share their data. So I think it's a matter of time that the whole culture of data sharing will be embedded, will be accepted by the private and the public sector. But yet again, we should also be quite clear that there may always be a necessity why you do not want to share the data. And I don't mention, of course, issues of national security, but there may be always reasons why data cannot be made available. There's one final point I want to make, and then I would like to close, and that is very much related to the element of level playing field. In each cooperation by partners, notably at global level, there needs to be a win-win for both sides. So it cannot be a situation that you work in a global project whereby one continent has a tradition of opening up the data, making them available, and the partner with whom you work in another continent has a policy of not sharing the data or making them available or interoperable. And I see, and that's something which I'm regretting more and more, I see increasingly an approach whereby people are keen to get access to the data of others, but are increasingly putting up walls in order not to share the data. And that is probably part of the overall culture we see at the moment, where multilateralism and global cooperation is under threat, where we all have a me first policy, where we are not willing to share anymore. We want to win ourselves at the expense of the others. And I'm very much afraid that if this trend continues, it will have a lot of damaging effects, not on global cooperation, but also on our potential, our capabilities to solve and address the grand societal challenges. So let's, as science community, always continue working with each other in an open way. Let's do everything to share our publications. Let's do everything we can do to also make our data available, so that indeed, for the benefit of mankind, for addressing the grand societal challenges, we can continue the cooperation as we have had it for a long time for the benefit of mankind. And that's just in a nutshell from what I wanted to present to you today. I can come back certainly to Q&As to see if there's anything which people would like to have clarified, where we have come from, why we have launched at the time the whole open access action plan, the link with open science, and where we stand today. And I think we have made enormous progress over the last couple of years, because don't forget, Plan S was only presented a year and a half ago, and the whole data related activities, the European Open Science Cloud, only started also 2 years ago. I think it's amazing how much progress we have made, and I sincerely hope that this progress will be continued, and that we are not going to see that the progress will be blocked because of self-interests or because of the end of multilateralism. Thank you very much. That was my contribution.
Thank you, Robert-Jan. I'm going to go straight into a clarification question. You mentioned openness, and we talk of open science and open innovation and open to the world. Could you maybe just explain a little bit more what exactly you mean by open? So in the sense of, should everything be black and white, open or closed? there's a difference between open, for instance, data versus fair data, which is not the same. And does open necessarily mean free? So free as in free speech and free as in free beer?
Yeah. Well, free beer is a nice one. I think everyone would sign up to that immediately. If I start with open access scientific publications, what is there the big issue? The big issue is that the results of publicly funded research, and this result if a scientific publication, should not be locked behind a high paywall for only the happy few who have the money to have access to. That means that the results of publicly funded research should be immediately and freely available. And that's why in the context of this openness debate, there will not be longer a situation of pay to read, that means to pay for an expensive subscription journal, but there will be a pay to publish, whereby a platform or an open access journal receives money to publish the article. So open access means there scientific publications making the results of your scientific work, your publication, immediately and freely available to the whole world. With regards to open data, it's a similar situation, that the data that you are generating are not located on local systems, are not disappearing at the end of the project, but that you have a responsibility as scientists to look after your data, to curate your data, to make them interoperable, and to put them, to store them into high quality repositories, to store them into infrastructures like the ones I mentioned, such as Elixir, which we have been setting up over the last couple of years with the EU member states. So openness is a culture of sharing, a culture of making things available, but making things available as well that they can be used by your peers. Just dumping data, unstructured data, of course, make no sense. Then you better keep these data for yourself or you destroy them. But there's a responsibility to make the data also available in such a way that your peers can work with them. It requires money, it requires budget, it requires efforts, but I think it requires above all a cultural change, that we do not see this as something annoying, something for the IT people to look afterwards, or something eccentric. No, it is inherent in the whole work of the science community. Are we there yet? Not at all. I give you an example. Look at the names which appear on a scientific publication. One of the names which is always missing is the name of the data scientist, the data expert who did all the work which allowed the scientists to write a paper. But this data scientist who did all the background work, he will be lucky, or she will be lucky, if she's mentioned in a footnote or in place 5 on the publication, but never in place 1. And that is, for me, I've once said, we will have a culture of the recognition of data and open access data when the name of a data scientist is not anymore in a footnote, but on place 1 or place 2 of a scientific publication. Then we are there, because then we have created a culture whereby data science and the work of data scientists is fully recognized as being important.
And maybe just to go into a follow-on question, do you think that open science can help reduce research misconduct?
Yes, when everything is made available, when everything is shared, there is a kind of an automatic corrective mechanism, because people can easily see what data you have used for your scientific work, on what basis, on what data have you based your publication. So open science, sharing, openness, transparency can, in my opinion, be an enormous driver to reduce scientific misconduct, because things become transparent and open. And then everyone can see how you have worked, what data have used, how you have interpreted the data. So I think one of the big benefits of the open science system is indeed a reduction of scientific misconduct.
Okay, so we're running a little bit behind. I'd like to move on to the next speaker. So thank you, Robert-Jan, for this overview from the point of view of the funder. Next, we have Javier de la Cueva, who is a lawyer specializing in issues related to technology and the internet, and he's also a scholar in law at Complutense University of Madrid. So he's wearing 2 hats, and he's going to give us his perspective on conflicts and synergies with respect to software licensing and so on.
Well,
Yeah.
Thank you. First of all, thank you very much for your invitation. I am really honored to be here trying to speak about this matter. Okay, I would like to put a little bit of context, because when we are speaking about open access and open science, we're not speaking about something that, okay, one day here came the European Union, and they thought is, oh, we're going to do this because we have this great idea. No. 2,500 years ago, there were a group of people who they began to make questions around the world, and they had a real huge problem, a big data problem. And this big data problem was that they had too many data around, and they did not have the tools in order to process it. So what did they do? They changed what was called the myth, and they began to speak about the logos. These were the first philosophers. So philosophy is born because of a problem of big data. This is one of the problems that we are facing now. So, of course, I do participate in the ideas and in the spirit of what the European Union has done, and my speech today would try to clarify a little bit or give some tools for better thinking about what we are speaking about. The first thing that we have to know is that we as human beings, we have the right to know. And this right to know was first expressed, or has been expressed always by all philosophers, but Kant spoke about it in his book, The Perpetual Peace. And he said that the right to know is not only important because then you will be able to go against an arbitrary king, an arbitrary power, but also because then you will foster the possibilities that the kingdoms that are around you will be able to know what you are doing, and that in that sense we will have less wars. So it is in the tradition, in the political tradition, to have openness. So it's not only a matter of science, but it is also science when during 20th century, for example, some things began to happen. And here we had the experience of Rachel Carson when she wrote this book called Silent Springs, which made and supposed a huge event in the United States, because she was researching about DDT. And the open access, the open data that she was allowed to access was not one that was, we could say, a good one. It was achieved in the sense that it was the data that was given by the companies that were providing this DDT. So what happened also in the 20th century, which was really, really important, we have to think about the crisis of the bovine spongiform encephalopathy, that is to say, the mad cow's disease. And in the mad cow's disease, there is an inquiry report, which is, I think it's a must if you want to know about what is open access. And there is a sentence there that we have to think deeply. And it says, tells the story about how the data was gathered. And one of the sentences says that gathering of data about the extent of the spread of the VSE was impeded in the first half of 1987 by an embargo within the administration. So making information about the new disease was not public. And the report says this should have never occurred. So when we speak about open science and we speak about open data, we're not speaking about theories. We are, of course, speaking about theories, but we are speaking about things that affect our lives, our daily lives, the things that we buy in a supermarket, the things that we smell in a polluted city, the environment where we all have to live together, this community where we all have to share our knowledge. So it's not just a matter of crazy scientists who are inside their labs and what they do is they play with their toolkits. No, it's something that affects directly to all the community. The second thing that we have to think about is that we face a problem. Okay, well, we have to spread information, we always have three items that hamper this transmission of information. The first one is technical, the second one is economical, and the third one is legal. So we have a problem with legalities here. Why do we have this problem? And we have this problem because of the lobby of the copyright industry. There are two items that have to face the same regulation. And these two items are, the first one is the entertainment industry, and the second one is research. And it is really paradoxical, and it's really incredible that both of the informations that are related to a Hollywood film and the publication of a cancer research are both regulated by exactly the same law. And of course, these two items have different necessities of communication. First of all, a film, the best thing for a commercial film is to have all the problems in order to communicate it. So for every barrier that you can introduce, what you are going to be able is you are going to put a price. You're going to be able to impose a levy. But that is not for science. For science, what we do need is we have to make as much as possible communication of the science. And it is just because of the essence of science. Science must be replicable. An experiment must be replicable. We need to do this test of replicability. Replicability is essential to science. So a film needs not to be reproduced, but science needs absolutely to be reproduced. So what did the law say? Well, the law, instead of choosing science, the law chose the circus. So instead of the bread, what we did, we chose the circus. And that is the legislation that we have nowadays, even in the European Union. So the conflicts that we can always face are related to intellectual property. How can we face these approaches? How can we approach these problems? Because this knowledge always, this public communication of knowledge always has been in a hostile environment. So the first person who did something that was quite clever and quite intelligent, and it was just, I think that gives us the clue, was a person that was called Henry Oldenburg, and he did it in 1665. Okay, here we had the Royal Society, and in the Royal Society, what people did is, okay, we had these aristocrats that they had free time, so what they wanted to do is, okay, they had a nice colleagues where they toyed with all these experiments. But in order to be able to test if the experiment was correct or not, they need that replicability. But these experiments at the beginning, they were documented in a secret logbook. And they were documented in a secret logbook because they wanted to avoid what was called usurpatio, that is to say, piracy. So in the end, what did they do? Okay, they decided to open that logbook. And here came, and they were founded, the first academic journal, that is to say, the Philosophical Transactions. So we have already the solution for open access in 1665. Another person who I would like to mention is Charlotte Hess and Elinor Ostrom, especially the second one. And she was awarded with the Nobel Prize because of her study of the common communities, the communities who managed some kind of common good. Nowadays, we have what is called the digital commons. And these digital commons, they have three layers. The first layer are what are called the request for comments. That is to say, it's a set of more than 8,000 documents. And what is the intellectual property license that they do have? Okay, they have a license that always science has had. You can replicate it. And if you improve it and you have something better to say, then please write it down and transmit it to the community, transmit it to the mankind, because this is good for all of us. And that they produced a work called Internet. So internet is an intellectual property work, and it is a free intellectual property work because you can copy it, you can reproduce it, you can transform it, you can distribute it, you can publish it, and of course you can make plenty of wealth with this internet property. So with this internet property, companies like Google have done a better job, have done a good job, and have demonstrated to the world how what they can do is they can obtain plenty of wealth. So that is the first layer, and that layer is a layer that is made for free for all of us. But we have a second layer, and this second layer is a layer that is composed by free software. For example, when we use the web, in this web, normally what we find is a web server. And in this web server, what we are able to find are, for example, things like Apache. And Apache is a web server where we are able to visualize, to document, or to download, etc., etc., plenty of files. And that also has a liberal license. That has been done for the benefit of all of us. But then we can go to a third layer. And in this third layer of a common goods, of a common digital goods, is where we can find open science and open data. So open data and open science is already using an infrastructure that is an infrastructure done by software and an infrastructure done by protocols. And these protocols, you can use them in a very, very free way. You can do with them whatever you want to. And with this software, you can do with it whatever you want to. Could we say that nobody is making money through these protocols or through this software? Well, at least all the companies that are making private benefits, they are using this common ground. In the end, what are we doing? What we are doing is we are promoting the installation of infrastructures over which what we would do is we would acquire certain kind of things, and we would acquire them in just this traditional way of how do we acquire property. We transform the nature, or we work, and what we have been doing, what we have been working, we are able to make the appropriation. So in the end, if anybody thinks that protocols or software, free software, do not foster wealth, well, they can see how they have done it through Google. So if anybody could say that request for comments and software and open science and open data, they will not give wealth, again, they will be committing an error, because we have the evidence through the request for comments and through the free software that the wealth is being done all around the world. And we do not have a private intellectual property work that has done such a revolution in the world as internet has done. No film from Hollywood has been able to do in the society what internet has already done. And one has a free and license that can be used by everybody. To finish with my speech, I would like to take into account three things. The first of all are the 3 Bs, that is to say, Budapest, Berlin, and Bethesda declarations. These were made by the librarians because they posed 2 things. They said, we do already have the documents, the content. We do already have the infrastructure. So why aren't we able to promote all this knowledge and to give it free for the world? And of course, the reason and the answer was, well, we do have an intellectual property problem, because intellectual property problem, as it is designed for Hollywood films, then we are not able to make all the public communication that we would like to do so. So what they did is 4 months later appeared Creative Commons licenses, which allow us to make public to the world what do we want to do with our goods. One thing is pending, and it is that we are always in a dynamic evolution. So what's going on what is going next? Okay, do we need open notebooks? Do we need open data, but it's certain kind? Do we need to make open web semantic systems? So then we would standardize how we transform non-structured data to structured data, etc., etc. And here is where we have to think, how could we do things, the new things that appear? And my proposition is a semiotic proposition. And I'm going to use the example of a traffic light. We have a traffic light, and a traffic light has three colors: green, red, and yellow. Depending on the country, these three colors have different significances or not. It is internationally understood that red means to stop. It is internationally understood that green is that you can pass, but depends on the country what yellow means. In the northern part of Spain is stop. In the southern part of Spain is rush. So that's a cultural aspect. But what we have to think is that we have this first syntactical layer, that is the three traffic lights, that we give a different signification, that is the semantic aspect. What do they mean? And with those three colors, then what we produce is a whole world where what enters is the pragmatics. There is where we introduce the ethics, the culture, the science, the meaning. What are the values that we want to introduce into a society? So every new phenomenon that could appear, we could analyze it under, or any new technology under those three layers. For example, free software. Can we use the syntax? Yes, I can access the code. So I can then modify absolutely everything. What can I do with a Windows? Oh, I only can do the configuration. I can only use the configuration. So it's only in the pragmatic part. So then, if we want to foster openness, we should only accept technologies where we could tinker with the syntactical part, or at least the semantical part, but never give for granted those technologies that impose us certain kind of configuration that could be in the pragmatic part, because then we will not be able to have our technological independence, which we need absolutely first for the good of our countries, second, for the security of a country without access to the code of the software that rules their infrastructures is not a secure country, and third, we need it just for knowledge. And that is what I wanted to report to this discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Javier. A couple of questions to frame the discussion that's coming and tying back to what you've said. So if there's public funding involved, do you think that the outcome should be a public good? And then should that be tied to, for instance, public infrastructure of research? And then how do you see this in industry/university engagement and collaboration?
Okay. There is, of course, a problem of sustainability, and there is a problem of governance. But the legitimacy of a public fund is that goods should go back to the public. That is, I think, a must. But it's not only a problem of science, because we do accept that with public televisions. And that is just some kind of, so I am funding my public television in my country, and I cannot download the production that I have paid. So this is a very extended thought. Okay, we finance it with public fundings, but we are not able to access the results. Of course, there must be limits to the information, but this limits to the information must be based on, first of all, security reasons, and second, things that could provoke certain kind of alarms to the population. But we have to be very aware that we must treat population as mature population, not what happened with the mad cows in England. So to answer your question, first of all, what is public funded must be publicly given. And there could be certain kind of exceptions, but these exceptions should be that, exceptions. And they have to be very, very, they should have a very, very good basis in order to accept them. It is our money as taxpayers.
Okay, and I see there's a whole range of questions that have come in as we go on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to split this up across topics. And I'm going to start with open access stroke Plan S for a few moments. So maybe directing this to Robert-Jan, what at the moment, what is the current state, do you know, of the support for Plan S? We heard that there are new countries stroke regions joining. There was a clarification question about China and India. Could you say a little bit about this? And I can see you're muted.
Not anymore now. I'm on. Where do we stand at the moment? I mentioned that Plan S had an enormous swift start with 13 European funding agencies signing up on the 4th of September 2 years ago, and gradually the coalition grew when the Wellcome Trust and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation joined in October. China joined just before Christmas, last Christmas, and India signed up early this year. Argentina last week was the one which signing up as well. So what we see is that the coalition S is growing. The number of funding agencies supporting Plan S is growing. At the same time, and I think that's a clever approach of coalition S, agreements are signed with open access movements, open access policies and platforms who are perhaps not 100% in line with Plan S, but still aim at the same. We see in Latin America quite an interesting movement of repositories, and it only makes sense to align with them and to work with them. The same is with regard to other countries which may perhaps not be 100% in line with Plan S, but still have the same goal of reaching open access. And that's why I think the approach now of Coalition S to work more with repositories, to work more with similar movements who aim at the same, is a very wise movement. So I think gradually, if you look at the moment where we stand, I think the coalition as it stands today with China and India on board represents about 1/3 of all public money available for scientific output. So there's still 70% to go, but it will change and it will come. And I think the train has left the station, and we are moving in the right direction.
And maybe I'll direct this one to Javier. So we know that, or I believe we spend around $10 billion per year in publishing scientific research. And one of the questions that came in is, this is obviously a lot of money, and we're obviously paying a lot of this money to commercial publishers. So should we be paying such a large amount of public funding to commercial publishers, given that there is, for instance, a very high profit margin for some of the major legacy publishers?
Well, the thing is that we need a transformation, okay? The digital age has put us in a perspective of needing to transform certain kind of industry. So we have to be very careful. How do we transform what were commercial industries that were based on paper? Okay, these ideas, facilities that were spoken about when we were publishing in atoms. And we do not have to put all these people into, we could say, unemployment. So we have to be very careful on how we transform industries in order to make this transition as, we could say, as smooth as possible. That's the first thing. And the second thing that we have to think is that it's not only what we pay, it's also what we give for free. Okay, all peer review is done for free. So these industries receive not only public funds, but they also receive assistance by the best brains in the world, who they are doing an absolutely marvelous work, and they receive absolutely nothing. So it's, I think it's a thing that we have to discuss a lot. Bibliometrics also affect to this item. If a professor wants to do an academic career, what he has to do peer review, and he has to publish in certain kind of publications. And if not, then he's got no accreditation. So in the end, everything is interlinked, and we have to think deeply into all the problems that we face when we have to do this industrial transformation.
May I perhaps add something? Because Javier rightly pointed out that we pay twice, but we pay 3 times. First of all, with the publishers, we pay for publications in these so-called prestigious journals. And the market is around 10 to 15 billion per year, as Gareth rightly said. Secondly, we pay the salaries of those professors who do for free the peer review for these so-called prestigious journals. And third, we pay a lot of taxpayers' money to our academic libraries to pay for the subscriptions of these expensive journals. So we pay 3 times. And if I then see that certain of these journals make an enormous amount of profits, up to 30 to 40%, percentages of which Amazon, Google, Microsoft can only dream, there's something very rotten in the system. And I think that's also a very good reason why we need to change things big time.
Just following on from this, so Plan S does not specifically favor any particular business model for publishing, but there is how will I say, an indication that they want to switch from subscription publishing towards, if there's money going to be spent, towards pay to publish. So basically pay to read, switching to pay to publish. Do you think that that will reduce the amount that we're spending per year on academic publishing, or is there a risk that that will go up?
Well, it's not just a matter of funding. It's not a matter of just the money. There's also this principle. I think the principle comes first, to make the results of publicly funded research freely available without any embargo. An embargo is not at all in the interest of science. Scientists want to have data and publications immediately. Embargo is purely there to help publishers, commercial publishers, to indeed have a certain monopoly for a certain period of time. So with regards to the budgetary component, even if it's for me secondary, I've always been very much in favor of having a cap on APCs, as it's called, because this will allow indeed that you avoid a situation whereby, because open access is the move, is the way forward, that then suddenly open access journals starts calculating absurd prices. So that's why I have been very much in favor always of a cap on the APCs to really control the financial situation as well. But for me, open access is not just a funding or financial element, it's a principal element. The results of publicly funded research should be made available freely and immediately. That's what it's all about. Of course, the financial component is important, but that's for me not number one.
And do you think that at some point we should be moving towards funding also for public infrastructure, for new platforms for opening up research, be they commercial or not, and also moving towards supporting learned societies to be able to help with open access?
Yeah, I think absolutely. One of the things we learned when we were debating Plan S is that there's a lot of smaller learned societies who publish society papers. They are keen to move to open access, but the transition is for them extremely difficult and costly. And that's why I'm very happy that Coalition S is paying so much attention to these learned societies to help them to make the transition. Now, you mentioned rightly the e-infrastructures, which are very much related to data handling, data storage. I've always said, let's not make the mistake for data, the mistake we made for scientific publications, meaning to let big commercial players take possession of it, which was happening to scientific publications. And it would be awful if that would also happen to the data we generate with public funds, that the data will be locked behind paywalls. So I think we have to be extremely careful that we do not repeat the mistake which we made for scientific publications. And that's why I'm so keen of also public funding agencies of research taking their responsibility, or charities like the Wellcome Trust, Volkswagen Stiftung, taking their responsibility and setting up e-infrastructures, and have these e-infrastructures function in a way that they are there for society, for scientists, and driven by scientists, and that they are not becoming commercial endeavors
whereby at the end of the day, we as science community have to pay an enormous amount of money to get access to the data we have been generating with public funds.
And Javier, would you agree with this? Is this your ideal future?
Yes, I do agree. I have the chance and I have the opportunity, and I am really, really lucky to be one of the members of the Food Nutrition Security Cloud. We have obtained this grant from the European Union. So now we are working, and we will begin to have to work in this Open Science Cloud. And we could say we will have to put our brains in our hands, you know. And it is absolutely fascinating, the challenge that we have to face. We have to develop a supported, a self-supported and a sustainable environment where all this data could be accessed by anybody in order to be able to produce, we could say, research and innovation. But I think that's the second thing that's quite important. The social impact that this has. When we speak about science, we are also speaking about democracy. And it's something that sometimes we do forget about it. And what is necessary is that democracy is based on transparency. And this transparency must also be based on the results that we obtain from the scientific evidences. We cannot build democracy without open science. That is one of the points that we have. So one of the conclusions that in the end I want to, or I always have to think about is, how can we make this sustainable? Not only just because of science, but because of the need that a clean democracy or a sane democracy, a wealthy democracy has depending on the relationships between democracy and science, and of course, open science.
And just switching this to Ivo, you're involved in the Marie Curie Alumni Association. You train and also support researchers on grants. How is it from the ground, so to speak? How do researchers that you know see open access? How do they, are they positive towards this? Do they know even about it?
Well, we have a skewed, biased vision because the young researchers that come into the room by self-selection, they are already keen, curious, or converted. So the real question is, what happens to the part of the iceberg that we don't see? And I guess that part of the iceberg is under the influence of senior researchers, current practices, also funders that Robert-Jan mentioned, the 70% of the funding, public funding money that has not in some way expressed an opinion or signed up to activities, initiatives like Plan S. So actually, before we delve further into the young researcher's perspective, if I could wear the devil's advocate hat on behalf of the open access community, the open access, open science advocates, I'm just going to cherry pick some of the comments that both speakers presented. So you have a compelling case here that science should be open. Embargoes are not in the interest of science. We are paying triplicate for our publications. And at the same time, only a third of the public funding for research has somehow expressed a strong or supporting opinion to Plan S, with 70% to go. I wonder if both speakers have a reaction on what about the funders that either don't express an opinion on this or are actually against it. What is their credible argument if we can assume that most public funders believe in return on investment for society and themselves?
Javier, go ahead.
So, well, I can begin. Let's think about lawyers. What do we lawyers do? We use the law. The law is public domain. Do we make money? Yes, we do. What do restaurants do? They use public recipes. Do they make money? Yes, they do. So when we speak about science, or when we speak about data, it is absolutely exactly the same. So what we do have to do, or what we need to do, is we have to foster the wealthiest platform as ever possible, where then we would be able to work with. And that's what we lawyers do since 2,500 years ago. And of course, restaurants do more or less the same time. So it's not something that is new. It is something that it has been there already. But of course, the problem that we face always is that they always try to make us think in a very limited way. When we think about copyright, we only think about the entertainment. We think about the film. We think about piracy. We think about the book. Oh, they pirated my book. Oh, what are the authors going to live, etc., etc. If there is no intellectual property, there's no creativity. No, that is not true. We have creativity all around, even though there is no intellectual property. There's creativity in judicial resolutions, and they are public domain. So, to come back to the point, I think that the discourse must be as wide as that. If money is public, it must go back to the public. And, it is absolutely evident that it is a question and it is a matter of principles. And that was Henry Oldenburg's point of view in 1665. So what we have to do is we have to continue that tradition. And it is the Enlightenment tradition. And there is what we have to put our ideas and our values in the Enlightenment revolution. And to foster creativity is to foster knowledge. And to foster knowledge is to foster creativity.
So we're moving definitely towards the data. So I'm going to switch from open access now towards open/fair data, but also linking to the title of this webinar, Synergies and Conflicts, and looking more at the conflicts. So Robert-Jan, you mentioned data management plans and a couple of concepts like data hugging. Now, researchers, obviously, you know, if you take early career researchers, PhD candidates, postdocs, they're very focused on their research and they're very focused on their publications. That's how they're evaluated and that's how they're rewarded. I won't go into the pieces there. But the question here is if we also have to carefully manage our data so that it becomes fair and or open, that takes, number one, a lot of time. I've done this myself. Number two, it's very hard to do it if you don't really know what it is and you're supported. And number three, who is going to help you? Who is going to show you how to do this? Who's going to pay for that? And is that going to be part of my program when it already takes quite a lot of time just to publish? So what do you think about supporting researchers in this and the time that it takes and the effort that it takes to make data fair/open?
The fact that it is difficult does not mean it's not important. On the contrary, I think it's a cultural change which is necessary. And in order to support that cultural change, I think it is important that financial incentives are given. Give an example, in most countries where a data management plan is an obligation, as part of your grant application, the costs of the data management plan are eligible costs. So you can indeed charge the costs for making a data management plan as part of the project. So you can even recruit someone who help you with it. You can recruit someone to make the data fair. So these are all part of the eligible cost regime in most countries where they are keen supporters of the open access data and data management plans. But I think besides these financial incentives, it is the cultural change which I very much insist on, which is necessary. And cultural change normally starts with the younger generation. And I think it is important that the younger generation is indeed going through that cultural change and it becomes normal for them to look after the data. I think it's also quite important that, as I said before, the ones who take care of the data are rewarded. And not only financially, but also rewarded in their career. If you are sharing data, making them available, making them interoperable, putting them on the, the required repository, I think they should be rewarded. They should be recognized as part of your scientific work for which you obtain points and for which you obtain recognition. And again, the data scientist who you may recruit, this person should also be mentioned on top of the publication you're going to have and not just be hidden somewhere in a footnote. So again, it all comes down to embedding the whole data handling in the scientific culture and creates what I always mention, a culture of data stewardship. That's what it's all about.
So if I can summarize data management plans at the start and throughout the research to help structure what you're going to do and prepare for your data stewards, professionals who will help you make your data manageable and open it up at some point. And then also linking that to the reward system, which I think we'll come back to after this.
Absolutely.
And maybe just to follow on from the word you used, data hugging. So data hugging, I understood this as the data is, you know, mine. I don't want to open it. But if I take a linked word, there's also what's called scooping, where if I open up my, let's say, data too early, other individuals can profit before me from my research. Javier, would you agree with the fear of scooping? How do you see this? Specifically for data.
Well, I think that is an anthropological question more than a legal question. But it is true that we always have fear that they can do with our data things that we did not expect, or as yesterday a journalist say, "Oh, they are stealing my picture." Well, I would prefer to reserve the word "steal" for the things that disappear. That is to say, I can steal a car, you no longer have a car, but you cannot steal my data because I still have my data. I think that as we, and I do totally agree with Robert-Jan in the sense that we need a different perspective and we need a change of mentality. And inside this mentality, what we're going to face, and we're going to find different kind of, we could say, new challenges and new problems that we did not face before. Okay, data mining, what happens with data mining when we do not give any credit? But if this data mining, we are doing it with official journals, what about the people who are working in the official journal? Do we have to give credit to these people, even though they are in, there's plenty of things, there are plenty of activities, there's plenty of problems that we are going to face, and we have to learn by doing. We will have to learn by doing, and this is something that is, as a scientific activity, we always do exactly that. For example, OpenStreetMap, I believe that you know OpenStreetMap. OpenStreetMap is a perfect example on how to give credit to the person who is uploading that part of the cartography. So every single data there has its correspondent metadata where all the data message is being included. And this is something that I think that it should be a rule of thumb that we should be used to. For example, in another project that I participated, that was Horizon 2020 Richfields project, which was led by Wageningen University. One of the things in the end that we designed was that all data must come with the metadata that will tell us not only the provenance of the data, and that would be something that is needed in order to qualify the quality of the data, but also the transformations that the data has been done and by whom. So then we would be able not only to know what is the license that is attached to that data, but also the person who has already been working over that data. But I do agree with Robert-Jan that that data that nowadays, that author that nowadays is buried inside metadata needs a significant position to be able to be seen as a data scientist and to give them the credit and the importance that these people have. And for that, we will face new problems, we will face new rules, and we will face new challenges that we will learn by doing.
I'm going to come back to the licensing specifically and also the rewards towards the end. Robert-Jan, we see that you're, I think, in Eindhoven there by the looks from the window. And Eindhoven is a technically oriented university that works very closely with industry. And if we look at open science, open innovation, how do you see that term openness in your collaboration with industry? Because obviously not everything can be opened up, and there is the concept of commercial sensitivity and the willingness of a company, for instance, to try and profiteer on their the research that they may have co-funded. So how do you see that that synergy conflict between open science on the one hand and the relatively closedness of industry on the other?
And it's a good question, notably for the Eindhoven University of Technology, because we are #1 worldwide in co-publications between this university and industry. And that is quite impressive, I think, because it shows that this university is fully embedded in the region, which is the high-tech region, full of impressive companies like Philips, DAF, NXP, ASML. We have very specific rules with regard to this co-publication, also with regard to the research that's being done together with industry. And this is, of course, rules related to integrity, related to ethical issues, but also with regard to at what stage what can be disclosed and what can be published. And it's very obvious that if a company like Philips is paying for research to be done here, that there are certain entitlements by Philips for the outcome of the research. That is only logical. We still have there good arrangements that parts can still be published, made available. So we have a set of guidelines and a set of rules on how to deal with this cooperation with industry, which for me is so important because a modern university is not in its ivory tower, is working for its region, it's working for its society as a whole. So we have taken care of that. It's learning again by doing on how we can make sure that the open science characteristics and the open innovation characteristics can still be maintained, while at the same time working with commercial players who have, of course, also issues of confidentiality, and that's only fair.
Just to follow on from that, do you see a difference for big universities or big labs versus small universities, small labs in that negotiation?
No, I don't think. We are a relatively small university. We have 12,500 students. We moved to 15,000. So we are amongst the smaller ones. And we have to negotiate, and we negotiate with very big multinational players. I think it's not so much dependent on the size, it's much more dependent on the quality of the people you have. We have a very strong recognition by the private sector in this region, the high-tech sector, and they want to work with us because we stand for quality and for excellence. So from that point of view, I think the size of a university is not that important when dealing with big commercial players. It's much more the quality what you have, because the quality makes you a reliable player and an attractive player for the private sector.
And just linking this up to IPR, comment to Javier. So do you see open science as challenging for intellectual property and licensing? So let me take an example. If, for instance, like Plan S, we have a publication as CC BY, and let's apply that to data. So the data should be cited, but anybody can commercialize it, change it, and reuse it. Do you see that as posing an issue for copyright and for rights of the author or institution?
No, I don't see a challenge. The thing is that by default, everything is forbidden. Copyright is copyright is property, and property, everything that is not allowed by the owner is forbidden. So the thing is that if there is a secondary possibility that could be a creative possibility, then it would be forbid. So when they say that intellectual property fosters creativity, I say no, because it forbids everything. And how can an institution that forbids everything be able to foster creativity? So the problem, there's not going to be any problem in IPR if we have Creative Commons BY, but the problem is that if there is a new aspect that is not inside, that is not has not been thought by Creative Commons, then we will have to redefine Creative Commons in order to introduce it. Okay, this happened already to the GPL when it had to face to DRM, and for example, one of the license of Creative Commons, they did not take into account the sui generis right, that is only a European right for databases. So this was not in the third version, and in the fourth version they had to introduce it. That is why, for example, OpenStreetMap has open data license. Nevertheless, to produce a new license is not a problem. So then it would be to draft a new license, introduce the problem that could be faced there, allow that possibility, that creation possibility, for example, scraping, and then once allowed that scraping, then introduce and relicense the older works. It is a bureaucratic aspect.
And Ivo, just bringing this down to the researchers and thinking of researchers who are, for instance, writing grant proposals, for instance, a Marie Curie fellowship. Could I work open science into my proposal? And could I work, for instance, this collaboration that Robert-Jan talked about? And how would I do that to get rewarded?
Well, absolutely. The reward that a scholar has, it's very, very difficult that we receive these awards in, we could say, in a direct money. Okay, it's like when you're a musician, everybody wants to be like Queen of the Rolling Stones, but there's only one Queen and only one Rolling Stones. And there are thousands of hundreds of people who sing and to play music. So in the end, the rewards that you are going to obtain is, like Peter Suber says in his work, open access. Our reward is inside our community, and that is to say projects, that is to say recognition, that is to say places where you are in the community, that is to say plenty of awards that you can receive, that they do not depend on the intellectual property of your projects. They do depend on the quality of what you are doing. To discover a new planet is nothing under intellectual property. The planet is going to be there, and that planet is not going to be you, but then you are going to be famous because you discovered that planet. And that is the important thing, that you discovered that planet. Einstein, he could register or not under intellectual property his two theories. That doesn't matter at all. What matters is that Einstein is Einstein because of his two theories.
And Ivo, what concrete advice then would you give your researchers coming to you asking about the grants?
So the first one is basically go above and beyond what the funders want and require, and that shows kind of a proactive understanding of what are the values behind the templates and the mandates and the funder drive. But nevertheless, it's not always easy. The bottlenecks are first a number of willing and proactive applicants that are not just going through what the funders want as a checklist, but actually understand what is the driving force behind. And what we see, for example, in experiments is that, of course, those few proactive candidates that are willing to go above and beyond, they do get a competitive advantage at grant evaluation. But maybe what they need more or ask more for is actionable advice. So to bounce off the question with a question back to Robert-Jan, I wonder how much of the University of Eindhoven experience, this very strong world-leading collaboration with industry, how much of that can an individual learn from and really copy and paste into their next groundbreaking research idea?
You mean with regards to the rules or with regards to the experience obtained?
More to the synergy, avoiding the conflicts, going back to the synergies, working along lines of mutual benefit that is both legally coherent and
well, let me give you an example. A lot of the problems which the companies here are facing, or the challenges, require fundamental knowledge. Our role as university is to stick to the lower TRL levels. So we are not into application or applied research. We do a lot of basic stuff. But if you look at some of the high-tech companies, whether they are in working on PET scans, or whether they are working on wafers, or the next generation high-performing semiconductors, they have fundamental issues, fundamental questions related to data they can use, related to artificial intelligence, related to design of the chip. So from that point of view, this is where the university can come in with its top quality knowledge, is to work on these fundamental questions where the companies do not have the in-depth knowledge and they need to have expert advice. So we find each other on a common agenda. And this common agenda comes, of course, with clear rules of the game on how we're going to develop the common agenda, where we respect the confidentiality issues of these companies. Yet at the same time, since we are paid with the public purse to a large extent, we of course will insist on certain openness to allow us to do parts of the work in a public and an open way, read scientific publications. So you find each other, and we have established so much best practice and good practice here at the university that for us, it's in our genes, and that's why we are in this #1 position, co-publication with industry, because we have developed that tradition over years, and we are willing to share it with anyone else who wants to hear about it.
So the bottom line is, I guess the model exists. It's just a question of getting it into the genes of the system.
Absolutely, it's getting into the genes. And let's not face, let's also be clear about one thing. You have heard that in Brussels, there has been a big discussion on the modernization of European university. And one of the big elements there is not only to modernize curricula, but also to let universities more than ever before work for their local environment, for their region and for their country, and work on the ground societal challenges. So there is an enormous, how should I say, drive at the moment from the political side to let universities take much more than ever before their responsibility in tackling the ground societal challenges, transferring their knowledge to industry, to society, to the citizen, open up the windows, letting the citizen be involved in citizen science and setting the agenda. So the universities are going through, I think, quite a discussion on how to be a modern university, which is really fully embarked and embedded in society. And here in Eindhoven, we are lucky that we already are such a university because of our tradition. We were created in '56 because a few big multinationals said, we need a university here to work on the fundamental questions which we have where we need fundamental knowledge. So it's in our genes to have that role, the societal role, which still many universities have to develop.
So I guess for institutions, that means that they need a reward system that aligns with the values you just mentioned. And we won't be able to comment on this. I guess it's a topic for a whole new webinar, and we are coming to close to time. So I just want to ask the speakers if you could give a gold nugget message to the young researchers, really just who are aiming at their next grant application within this year. What actionable advice would you give them exactly on the synergies and conflicts between disclosure and IPR? Robert-Jan, do you want to go first?
Okay, my advice would be go for it. Be open. Be not afraid. Be creative. Work in teams. Be optimistic. Share. That is something which I hope that the young generation, the young researchers will always keep in their mind, this attitude, and not be driven by fear or driven by, oh, they may steal my data, or they will probably publish earlier than I do, oh, I will lose my, no. Don't start your career in an area or with an atmosphere of fear and suspicion. Start your career in an attitude under an umbrella of openness and cooperation.
Beautiful. Javier?
I couldn't say anything else, but I could try to say that, okay, if the more you give, the more you receive. But then my lawyer pots come here and said, and beware of those who are bad people.
Great. Thank you very much, speakers. Thank you very much to Marco Massier, who's in the background running the whole show. Thank you to Gareth for moderating, and the 190 attendees who lived through the webinar. We couldn't cover all the questions. We apologize for that. There's only so much time, but the follow-up webinars will be demand driven. So we'll get back to the attendees and we'll prioritize your headaches. And if we're lucky, we'll match them with speakers like these. So thank you all and have a good day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Have a good evening.